Now we are in the presence of God to listen from Him, what He wants to share with us today. As I stand here this morning, I am very much conscious of the time that we are passing through. If I ask you, how are you doing? Well, some of you may keep silent, stare at my face, or some may just smile hesitantly and say, "It's okay, Pastor, we are just going on." The reason is simple. We are all facing a very uncertain times. We do not know what is in store for us next movement. We do not know even in the current situation we are protected or we are exposed to dangers. Now these are the realities of life which down through the centuries, children of God and every human being on the face of the earth has faced. But the realities do determine the responses of certain people in certain ways, depending upon how they look at God and they garner strength to face the world. But at times, those who do not have trust in God who is capable to lead them and who may not know Him very personally in their lives, they most probably end up in hopelessness, in utter despair, and tragically some of them call it the end of their life and do something very decisive, which only leaves grief and pain in the members of the family and in the dear ones thereafter. Now this is a very difficult time that we are in, and nothing else is ruling our mind, or at least dominant in our thoughts, is that, Lord, what is happening? How am I going to see tomorrow? Will my young ones, will the older ones in my family, will my sibling be safe tomorrow morning? Will we sail through these difficult moments, through these waves of adversities that strike us so hard? Will we be able to cross over it and see our life settling down well once again, full of joy and peace? As I was also meditating upon the word, the Lord led me to Psalm 93. And I want to share a few thoughts that the Lord has put into my heart from this psalm. Psalm 93 is one of the 7 psalms which celebrate Yahweh's kingship in the book of Psalms. Traditionally, Psalm 93 used to be sung on the 6th day of the week, in the morning worship as well as in the evening service in the Jewish temple. The Levites used to be dressed well, and they sing in the morning this psalm, and in the evening they end the day with that, with a hope of the next day that is called Sabbath, to take rest. Now on the 6th day they declare the kingship, the reign of God above everything before they go and take rest the next day. And in the evening especially, they used to sing this psalm in continuation to Psalm 92. Psalm 92 is a psalm of Sabbath. And Psalm 93 is the declaration of Yahweh as the king over everything. His reign, His dominion, His sovereignty is declared over everything. In the worship mode, when people used to gather in the Jewish temple to sing and praise God, whenever they sung Psalm 93, they were saying one thing: let whatever may happen around us, it doesn't matter. What matters is our God is still in control. He holds everything in His hands, and if He is there, I am safe on the face of the earth. Though we are not sure when was this psalm written or who wrote it, but a careful reading of this psalm tells us that probably this psalm was written somewhere after the death of David, when the temple was built in Jerusalem. And most probably this was also the time when the psalmist and the community and the nation was facing some sort of threat. But amidst such threats that endanger their existence, the psalmist is invoking the community of the faithful ones in Israel to join with him and to declare to the world that Yahweh is the King. He knows, and his people know, that the situation is not very good. The situation endangers and creates a situation, a circumstance which is actually going to shake the foundation of their life itself. It's very similar to our time that we are going through. When we all thought that COVID has gone and we have vaccine and now we are well settled to face the challenge that has threatened our life for last 1 year, suddenly we find that everything is shattered into pieces and COVID rises up its ugly head. And the coronavirus once again comes very close to us, breathing death, pain, sorrow, and suffering into our life. At this moment, as I read this psalm, I see many thoughts that must be going on in the mind of the psalmist, which is so encouraging and so relevant for me and you. As I trust upon the Lord that I share this word, it will be a blessing to you. This beautiful short psalm is very different from the remaining psalms in this book. In this psalm, the difference comes by noticing that when in the individual psalms of prayer and lamentations, the psalmist complains about so many things and invokes God to come in rescue of him. In this particular psalm, Psalm 93, the psalmist, although caught in midst of adversities, the psalmist looks up to God and starts putting God in relation to the challenges that he's facing every movement. He knows that the situation is not very good. And as we meditate upon this psalm, we will recognize that how threatening was the situation for the psalmist and the nation of Israel. But then, because he looks at God in a certain way, he is able to face the challenges of the adverse waves that are beating against his life or the life of the nation. The psalmist, in a sense, represents a true child of God, who in midst of all the problems surrounding him or her, surrounded by dangers, the psalmist, like us, lifts up his eyes to God and tries to see beyond the dark clouds of pain, loss, discouragement, disappointment, fear, and doubts, to that bright sun, the Lord himself, who shines beyond the dark clouds that cover him before our eyes. He realizes one thing, that the King who rules above all these things, he is the one who instills energy into the world by his light to sustain life in this world. And as long as he's able to recognize the fact that Yahweh is king and he is ruling even above the clouds of darkness that cover his vision from seeing the glory of God, he knows this for sure, that there is a hope beyond all these dark clouds that I see before me. He has a few things to recollect in his mind. He has a few things to reflect upon and sing aloud before his congregation. He is inviting them to join with him in the bold declaration that Yahweh is king, at the same time to tell them, to encourage them, and to say that, come on, get along with me. Join with me in celebrating the victory of this king, because he is sufficient for me and you today, tomorrow, and in the days to come. He has a few important things that he's trying to remind them. And this is where I think meditating upon this psalm this morning is going to be so encouraging and strengthening for our own life in these difficult times. Is there anything or anyone listening to me ravaged by fear of being struck by the deadly virus corona? Is there someone who is in deep sorrow and pain as he thinks about his or her dear one who is found to be corona positive, or maybe struggling in hospitals, or maybe struggling in isolation at home? Is there a family that is totally confined to their house without any help from the dear ones, just because they are struck by this deadly virus called corona? Listen to me very carefully, my friends. This message is for you. You are made capable to face this difficult time. These waves of adversities shall not break you if you learn a few important things and preserve them in your heart from this Psalm 93. The first thing that psalmist, as a worship leader, when he sings this song or this hymn or this psalm before the congregation, he is inviting them to declare that Yahweh is king. But in doing that, the first thing that he tries to remind them is that the Lord reigns in everlasting majesty. The Lord is king. Yahweh is king, no doubt about it. It's a bold declaration to the nations and to the nation of Israel. It is to guarantee them that let what may be the situation that you go through, here is a God who is above everything in your life. Nothing in this world can endanger your existence. Nothing can harm you unless he permits it, because he is the sovereign king of the universe. But the truth is that he is not only just king, but his kingship is eternal and he reigns in majesty. Verses 1 and 2 of Psalm 93. He says, the Lord reigns, he is robed in majesty. The Lord is robed in majesty and armed with strength. Indeed, the world is established firm and secure. Your throne is established long ago. You are from all eternity. In the ancient world, everyone was aware of some king, maybe of a smaller territory or a bigger territory. But what was common among all these kings, big or small, is the way that they exhibited their might, their glory, their majesty, and how they sat with pride to rule from their throne. Now, as the psalmist declares to the nation that Yahweh is king, he is reminding, by using this image of king to his nation, is reminding that he is beautifully robed in majesty. He is powerful in deeds, and he is seated upon the throne. Now, these are three important things that every common man of any time who lived under a particular king wanted to see in a king. Anytime when something is mentioned about a king, or a thought goes back who the king is, he is always seen as the one who is robed in a big robe, a big dress. He wears something very beautiful, who has power and authority in his hand, and who sits on the throne and executes judgment. Now, as the psalmist declares that Yahweh is king, he tells his people that if you think these three things are important to be a king, then remember, when Yahweh is the king, he is not simply dressed in some beautiful dress. He doesn't wear a long robe and looks glorious, beautiful, but he is robed in majesty. The word that is used for majesty implies loftiness. It actually means the greatness of God. He is great. He rules from above everything. Nothing can be compared with him. He is lofty. He is great. He is so big beyond your imagination. And in this greatness, as he resides, he is looking majestic. And in that majesty, when he is robed completely, the psalmist says that he is armed with strength, as NIV would put it. But if you look at ESV, the ESV says he is girded himself with strength. I like the ESV translation here. He is girded with strength. Girded with strength, when the psalmist says about Yahweh, he is actually invoking the minds of the people, provoking them to think about their daily life. What does it mean? Girding belt around one's waist was a common scene that every ancient person has seen in the daily life, especially when in Israel. In Israel, or in the ancient world, men used to wear long robes. And whenever they wanted to get down to do something which they want to do, to perform certain function or accomplish certain task, the most spontaneous response is to gather their long flowing robe and to tie it firmly so that the dress is manageable and it doesn't become an obstruction in performing his duty and the function. Now, in the case of Yahweh, he's saying that he's robed in majesty, and once he's robed in majesty, he is actually girding his waist with strength. That means this God who is dwelling in lofty places, the God who is beyond everything of this world, he is actually prepared to come down into the lives of his people to do something. He's prepared. He's powerful. He's ready to do his part in securing the lives of his people as the king. It shows his preparedness to do his job. Psalmist sees the king, Yahweh, in the same way. If you read Psalm 65, verses 5 and 6, talks about the mighty Savior God who comes to the rescue of his people as the one who is armed with the strength. He is not just robed in majesty, but he is actually armed with the strength because he is about to do something for his people. Are you fearful? Are you scared of anything that is happening in your life or in surroundings? I have lost in the past 2 weeks several of my known friends, some who studied with me, some who worked with me, some whom I know for a long number of years. I know for last 2-3 weeks, many of my friends and acquaintances are hospitalized and fighting between death and life every moment. We do not know what we are going to hear. And sometimes this constant inflow of sad news makes us painful and raise questions. In such situations, when fears assail into our heart, Let us lift up our eyes and look to the Lord and put our concerns and fears before him and compare it with his loftiness. Let us accept that he is above all these things. He reigns as the king and his kingdom is everlasting. Let us, third thing, see him on the throne, seated in majesty. His throne is established from eternity and it will remain in eternity. He will be always there as the king, and nothing of this world can determine the end of his kingship. The image of the king on the throne reminds a worshipper, a believer, a child of God, the sovereignty of God. A king who is able to sit upon the throne and be robed in majesty and be armed with strength. He is a sovereign king. Now, celebrating this great reality that my God is seated upon the throne and he is above all these adversities that I face, the psalmist is consoled because all these three things together tells him a great truth, and that is more relevant for him. The most relevant point that psalmist builds up out of these three important things that he envisions together as he declares Yahweh is king is mentioned in verse 1, the last part. He says, indeed, the world is established firm and secure. To say this great truth, that the world is established firm and secure, he has to say that God is robed in majesty and he is armed with strength. That guarantees the psalmist and the worshiping community that the world will never move away. It will never fail. Why? It's not because the world is permanent, but because here is a king who is capable to take it forward, to confirm it, to establish it, and to protect it from falling away. Momentary waves of adversities hitting against the boat of life of yours and mine is not going to be the end as long as God is in control. He keeps it firm and secure because it is important for us to realize that if lose this vision of God as the one who keeps control over everything and nothing is beyond his authority, we will lose our hope. But to keep up our hope and to trust upon him and to submit to his will as the king who rules over us, it's beautiful for us to remind in the words of Isaiah as he reminds the nation of Israel in Isaiah chapter 40 that he has counted every stars. He has determined the course of the stars and their movements. He calls them by name and he has placed everything in the cosmos in its own particular place and position. Now, if he is that great and mighty to determine everything, the great stars of this universe, he is capable and is still in control of your life. That is why also in Proverbs chapter 16 verse 9, the wise man while teaching says, humans can desire and plan in their hearts, but it's the Lord who establishes them. Not only the world, even our very thoughts, our desires are established by God. Unless God decides that our innermost desires may become real for us in this world, it's not going to happen. It means whether it is the visible world or the invisible world, whether it is the visible enemy or the invisible enemy like Corona, cannot defeat us at this time. Because if God is with us and if he establishes it, our life, and if he becomes the reason for us to announce to the world that the world is established firm and secure, then we can be encouraged in the most adverse situations. Let us learn to face the challenges of our life by looking at God as the one who is robed in majesty, girded with strength, and the one who is upon the throne. And by that, he makes sure that the world is established firm and secure, and we are kept safe in that. You will remember that beautiful hymn that we sing. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know, yes, I know, he holds my future. Your world, your private world, your own life is secured. Because of him, we will overcome this difficult time. Tell yourself wherever you are that I will face this challenge in my family, in my personal life, with complete boldness, not because I am capable to do that, but because I know that my King is Yahweh and he holds authority over everything. My tomorrow is secured and safe. The second important thing that the psalmist reminds the worshiping community while facing this difficult time and declaring that Yahweh is the King is, the second important thing is that the Lord is mightier. The Lord is mightier. Verses 3 and 4. Here the psalmist acknowledges that the Lord is mightier than everything that comes against him. The Lord is capable to keep in control anything that comes against you and me. In the time when we are not sure that while even sitting and listening to this sermon, are we protected? Are we safe? Or are we, affected by corona and we are in the beginning stage? When we are not sure, let us tell ourselves this great thing, that my God is mightier than this biggest threat to my life, to my society, to my nation, to the world. Reading between these lines in verses 3 and 4, I can see the mind of the psalmist, where he, while celebrates God's reign over everything and his might enough to control every wave of adversity that hits his life, the psalmist is also conscious of his own weakness. Corona has taught us one thing. We can make efforts to protect ourselves, but humanity can never take pride and say that I am guarded from every danger but my strength. We can never be able to say that scientific advancement alone can protect us. But definitely relying upon God's wisdom, the intelligence that is given to humanity, we make every effort to make life comfortable in this world for us. But the ultimate protection comes from the King who reigns above everything. The moments when doctors will kneel down and say, I'm sorry, I cannot help your dad. I cannot help your mom. I cannot help to save your life. I am telling you, my friends, my Bible says that that is the moment for you to lift up your eyes and look up to him and say that, Lord, you are mightier. You are mightier than this power that invades into my life, that causes threat to my life. Now the psalmist is using a very beautiful image here to express that how God's might is greater than the might of this world that threatens him or his community. In verse 3 he says, the seas have lifted up, Lord, the seas have lifted up their voice. The seas have lifted up their pounding waves. The image of a raging sea pushing its boundaries and invading the dry land where other lives are surviving. The image of a high and noisy wave coming with full strength to cause destruction actually signifies, number one, it tells that it is an ever-changing, unstable, fleeting space where nothing is permanent, everything is momentary. In the ancient world, many times people feared to venture into sea because unlike the dry ground, they have no assurance that the next wave will not cause them to drown and die in the middle of the sea. The waves of the sea were seen as the strength, irresistible strength of the nature, the fury of the nature which mankind cannot bear. It is so uncertain. Every wave rises up, and every time when that wave moves away and disappears, there is a new wave shaking your boat. So the psalmist is saying, the seas have lifted up, Lord. The seas have lifted up their voice. The second thing, that the image of raging sea that the psalmist uses here reminds that there is uncertain and angry sea which is dangerous for his existence. It does not yield life, but it only breeds death. It does not bring consolation, but it only brings sorrow and pain. It never builds up anything from ruins, but it brings everything built up into ruins. It brings down everything down and leaves nothing for someone's shelter in the difficult days. The sea in its anger respects no boundary. It respects no boundary. When tsunami had hit the southern part of India, or when tsunami had hit Japan, we all have seen few years back in our television during the news time, we all have witnessed the anger of the nature. How strongly it has invaded the dry land and swept away everything. It did not honor the elevated buildings. It has not honored the lower parts of the earth. It has not honored any protection guard or the walls that the humanity had built to contain the power of the water. But every time it rose up with a greater wind, it washed away everything that was in front of it. Anything that came on its way, it swept away completely. The loss that the humanity or the nations had suffered during the tsunami time, we all have seen, and some of us or our relatives have suffered even the massive destruction caused by the waves of the sea. Tsunami has come in a different way at this time in the name of Corona. The sea is angry. The Corona comes to us today without even making us aware of its presence, without even telling us that I am invading your space. But when it comes, it creates destruction. It disturbs the family life. It disturbs our peace. When we thought life is so cool and we were about to finish 2019 and were willing to welcome, gladly looking for the new year 2020 to welcome a new year into our life, tsunami of Corona quietly entered into our lives. In 2020, Corona caught us unexpectedly and caused us to rethink about the value of our life and our achievements. Towards the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021, when we thought that we have almost conquered it and we have vaccines ready, Corona returns with its second wave, with greater strength, with more variants, wreaking havoc, causing great damage to lives on this earth. bundling us all once again into different corners of our own houses. Many of us have moved into the dark rooms, isolating ourselves. We are now scared to meet people. We want to keep distance from the people, even the ones whom we love the most. Because when our existence is threatened, nothing is more dearer than our own lives. Second wave has wreaked havoc. We are suffering as a nation as part of this corona's rage. And even before we see the end of the second wave, and we are awaiting, as the experts say, for its peaking in the mid of May, there are already predictions that towards the end we may see a third wave of corona hitting us. The waves will come. The waves of uncertainties, fear and anger will come against us. But if at all we want to be ready to face these waves and tell the Lord, like the psalmist, the seas have lifted up their voices. They have lifted up their pounding waves. We have to accept one truth in our life and let it sink into our hearts and our minds completely. That is to acknowledge that although there are challenges around us, and facing them in our weakness is impossible, there is a God who is mightier than everything. In verse 3, it is a frank acknowledgement of the threats around the psalmist. But if we see only this, it makes us hopeless. It drives us to death. It makes life gloomy. So the psalmist has a very creative way of looking at it. He compares his God, his strength, and with the strength of the sea, that which he feared always. He declares, mightier than the thunders of the great waters, mightier than the breakers of the sea, the Lord on high is mighty. He says, come on, compare that which threatens your life, and you think that this is going to havoc in my life and destroy me completely. Compare it with the might of God, in whom you trust, and you proclaim him as the king who reigns over the nation today. You compare both of them, and you will find that the one in whom you rely and the one who has become your king is mightier than every other power, every other force that comes against you. The nation of Israel, when they say about this, they can always go back to their history. They know from the bondage of Egypt, when God delivered them through Moses, he brought them to the wilderness and they were traveling towards their promised land. But there came a time when they had to stand before the Red Sea and feel that everything has come to an end, simply because it is not only the Red Sea in front of them that stops their journey further, but it is also the fast approaching army of Pharaoh to destroy them and to enslave them once more. Israelites were scared. They were terrified. They were fearful. But God tells them that do not worry about it, because when I am there with you and I am with Moses, I'm capable to divide the Red Sea into two parts. I will make way through the seas for you, that you will cross over to the other side and celebrate my victory. The waves that threaten your life, I am capable to divide them into two parts, and I will make way for you. What is impossible for you, I am able to make it possible for you. And when you fast approach the promised land, when you're excited to enter into the promised land, when Jordan River overflows with its complete strength and power, God says, I have Joshua with me. And as my ark and the Levites step into it, I'm going to once again divide the sea. The flood I will divide once more into two parts. And you will cross through that way and receive my promise that I have made to you. That is why in the book of Isaiah, the prophet says, who is the one who can tread of the waters except the Lord? When the Lord is seen as the one who walks over the uncertainties, to walk over the waves of the sea that create destruction by its fury, when the Lord walks over it, it is the beautiful picturization of God's rule or reign and power over everything. That is why on that night, when the disciples were traveling with Jesus in the middle of the sea, when they were threatened by the storm in the sea, and they said, teacher, don't you care for us? The God incarnate stood up in their boat, and then he just chided the storm, and he just commanded, be still and quiet. That's enough. The storm became silent. It calmed down completely. On the other occasion, when the disciples were traveling in the sea, Jesus comes walking on the water. Oh, what a powerful image, that if you follow this master's commandments and you get into the sea once, even in the darkest moments of your life, he will come walking over the most terrifying waves and the uncertainties. He will walk over that. He will come to you and say, Peter, my son, my daughter, come on, step out of the boat. Walk on these uncertain waves, and I am guaranteeing you that you will not drown there. When you will feel that you are drowning, he's going to hold your hands and lift you up. He is mightier than the thunders of the great waters, mightier than the breakers of the sea. Nothing can cause destruction to your life because he is mighty. He is strong. The Lord on high is mighty. Let us declare, announce it in our houses as we listen to this message. The last and the final thing that the psalmist wants to tell them is that the Lord is trustworthy. Verse 5. Now in verse 5, the psalmist is talking about the statutes, the decrees, the testimonies, the laws of Yahweh. The Lord is known in the Old Testament by his deeds and by his words. If his words fall, he's an unreliable God. He's an untrustworthy God. But because his words stand forever, they are standing firm, always indifferent to the circumstances that come against us. Because his words can never fall away. Because they cannot fail. The Lord is trustworthy. The Lord is trustworthy. Someone may be mighty in whom you trust. Someone may be robed in majesty. But if that person in whom you trust is not trustworthy, you can never depend upon him. But the beauty of psalmist's thought and reflection upon God is that my God is not only robed in majesty, he is not only eternal in his reign. He is not only mightier in his power than every power that comes against me. But my God is trustworthy. I can trust him. If he says, I will not leave you nor forsake you, I can say, Amen, Lord, I believe you, because your words never fail. Your words never fail. You never fail. The Hebrew word that is used there, which is translated in NIV as statutes, can include so many things. It can include the law, the commandments, the warnings, and the promises. Psalm 119 uses this word repeatedly in multiple ways. Verse 22, 24, 59. There are so many verses in Psalm 119 where you will find the same word is used in multiple ways. And NIV says that it will stand firm. It will stand firm. Nothing of it will be shaken. Nothing will be brought down. In some other translation, it says it is trustworthy. The decrees, the testimonies of God is trustworthy. In other words, God's trustworthiness is because his words are infallible. Because Once what he has spoken forever. When man in his fickle mind can say yes and no together, my God, when he says yes, it means yes. And when he says no, it means no forever. We can trust him at every time. Even though we walk through the valley of death, he will be still with us if he says. Let us not doubt him during this corona time. Concluding on God's faithfulness towards Israel and the steadfastness of his promises. The word says in Joshua chapter 21 verse 45. The word says this way, not one of all the Lord's promises of Israel failed. Everyone was fulfilled. I'll read it again for you. Not one of all the Lord's good promises to Israel failed. Everyone, amen, everyone was fulfilled. Because once he has spoken, he doesn't change his words. He is trustworthy. Look up to him. This is about the unfailing nature of God's promises. If you read Isaiah chapter 55 verses 10 and 11, speaking about the purpose that it accomplishes, the Lord says, as the rain and the snow come down from heaven and do not return to it without watering the earth and making it bud and flourish, so that it yields seed for the sower and bread for the eater, so is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty. Amen. But will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I send it. When standing before the grave, when Jesus says, girl, rise up. When he called Tabitha Kumi, he meant it. His words went out from his mouth. It brought life out of death. Hence, the psalmist speaks about the holiness of God. Hence, the psalmist speaks about the holiness of God. Although here the word holy can be understood as the purity of God, as the perfection of God, as the sacredness of God, but in particular, as many scholars would say in verse 5, the word holy could mean a state of a worshipper's mind that is free of doubts, in whom he trusts. It is pure of impure lies. It is pure of deceit. It is pure of untrustworthiness. Because your God and my God keeps up his word, he is trustworthy. So he is holy. There is no lie in him. There is no deceit in him. There is no cheating in him. So in his temple when you come, his trustworthiness, because of his words, covers the entire temple, and it is beautiful. You can rejoice there. It is beautiful. And it is beautiful for endless days. It's not for one day. It's not just for today. It's not just for tomorrow. It is for endless days. It gives unquenching hope to a worshipper of God that in his presence is the unending truth, dependability, and the beauty of transparency with which God relates with us. Dear friends, when you and I go through this difficult time and we see death before us, sorrows, pain, tears, which make us feel very low, let us lift up our eyes to the King of the universe, who reigns in majesty, who reigns over everything, who is dependable, who is trustworthy, who is prepared in his strength to come down, to rescue us, to do the work for us that we need when we cry out to him.